What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. These days, if you have been watching the conflict unfold around the Ukrainian and Russian border territories, you might have stumbled upon some footage of miniature drones lurking on the roadsides, waiting for trucks to pass by and then following them until their ultimate demise. Some people call it a new kind of ambush warfare, while the others call it a desperate tactic to regain lost ground and territories. But when you look closer, it's not just a new trick or a single incident. It is the tip of the iceberg of an evolving strategy that Russia employed when taking back a very big part of Kursk region. The worst thing you can do is to underestimate and ridicule your enemy without actually trying to understand them. That's why we think it is very important to talk about the Russian military's new strategy with all seriousness, at least from time to time. Because that's very easy to call your opponents imbeciles who do not know what they're doing. And yeah, there are plenty of news reporters, media and even content creators like this. So we will leave it this kind of reporting to them. On this channel we are trying to be as fact-based as possible, so that it helps you build your own vision of the conflict. And so if you're ready to be impartial and analytical, feel free to subscribe if you have not already. Thank you, and now let's continue. So yeah, Russia's previously clumsy attempts at modern drone warfare have turned into something more refined. By landing unmanned aerial vehicles near essential roads and letting them lie in wait, the operators preserve battery life, avoiding jamming efforts and strike at precisely the moment a convoy approaches into view. This new approach is not mere guesswork or a random stroke of luck. It is the culmination of months or maybe even years of real combat experience, adaptation and improvisation. But luckily, Ukrainians are adapting as well. And since this new tactic of using Russian drones is already known to the public media, including us guys on YouTube, we are certain the armed forces of Ukraine discovered this strategy a long time ago and changed their approach accordingly.
Nearly 3,500 drones have been acquired so far. 400 hobby drones have been sent direct in the mail. And it's not just foreigners being asked to donate. In service stations and many shops, the fundraising is prominent.
That is the good part of today's video. But unfortunately, according to many military analysts, this new tactic played a big role in Russians retaking big parts of Kursk region, which once again confirms the fact that you should never underestimate your enemy and instead learn from them, so you can prevent similar experiences in the future. So today, let's explore how these ambush drones made the life of Ukrainians in Kursk much more complicated, and how Ukrainians were able to discover this strategy, learn, adapt, and overcome these challenges in the future. A couple of years ago, before February 2022 to be specific, nobody would have guessed that some of the most critical changes in conventional land warfare would be delivered by first-person view drones lying on the ground like patient predators. Simple as that. Yet, that is precisely what happened in Kursk. A Russian group known as the Rubicon Center of Advanced Unmanned Systems decided to see if they could shatter Ukrainian supply lines by exploiting an old tactics. A simple ambush. We are used to picturing ambushes as squads of soldiers crouching behind rocks or tall grass, hiding, but technology has taken over, let's be real. Now it is a flying camera with an attached warhead resting silently near a busy road. This shift was not just about random improvisation. It emerged from the realization that in a world saturated with electronic warfare, a drone hovering in mid-air waiting for a target is too easy to jam or spot. Battery life drains, signals get lost, and operators give themselves away by continuously transmitting. But if you just land the drone, shut down the engine, and wait, you can operate for hours. You can wait for the perfect moment, then lift off, accelerate behind the Ukrainian pickup truck stacked with crucial supplies, and do your dirty job. What's fascinating is that Ukraine had been experimenting with the same tactic in previous battles, landing their own drones in targeted zones and waiting for Russian vehicles to roll by, effectively turning this strategy against the creators themselves. But in Kursk, unfortunately, it was the Russians who perfected the art. They learned how to avoid losing radio connection, how to deploy fiber optic cables so they would not get hopelessly tangled in dirt path or in trees branches, and how to reliably strike without losing their focus. The result was a near constant threat to any convoys that tried to drive along these crucial roads. Wreckage kept piling up, and ultimately it created a huge fear factor, forcing Ukrainian logistics to rely on riskier, less efficient routes, or even abandoning them altogether. By the way, if you are curious to see how exactly these ambushing drones work, I uploaded some videos to my Patreon. The link is down below, please go ahead and check it, and I thank you all so much for your memberships. If you're a new Patreon member, welcome. Back in August 2024, Ukraine surprised the world with a rapid advance that many called a lightning war, or a blitzkrieg. Instead of massive tank columns plowing through the front lines, Ukraine used electronic warfare to jam Russian drone frequencies, launched its own waves of swarm-like attacks, and pushed deeper into Russian territory than anyone thought possible. At one point, they were holding around 500 square miles in Kursk Oblast on Russian soil, which was a massive blow to the Kremlin's propaganda. The Russians were blindsided by this new style of warfare. All of a sudden, they could not see where Ukrainian units were operating, because their reconnaissance drones were jammed or shut down. They could not direct artillery effectively. They found themselves in the dark, so to speak, and Ukrainian units breezed through the lines like ghosts on the offensive. This was a textbook example of 21st century maneuver warfare. No more big columns of T-90 tanks, no unstoppable iron behemoths, just these small nimble groups with top-notch drone support and relentless jamming capabilities. For a few months, it seemed like the old ways of fighting were irrelevant. I mean, why risk sending your vehicles through known corridors if you could just knock out the opponent's eyes in the sky? And that is yet another example of taking your opponent seriously and learning from them, instead of just plainly dismissing them as an incapable force. As a result, Russia found a way to counter Ukraine's electronic warfare advantage. They started deploying fiber optic drones. And what made them so special is that instead of sending signals through the airwaves, which could be obviously jammed, the drones transmitted through a thin cable, a fiber optic. It sounded archaic, like something from the early days of the telephone, but it worked. These fiber lines were immune to jamming, and the Russians began leveling the playing field. Ukraine's initial blitzkrieg slowed down significantly as a result.
Fitting these spool cartridges to FPV drones. The fibre optic strand unfurls as the UAV flies towards its target.
If you've heard the phrase World War I with drones, it might sound ridiculous at first. Yet, that's exactly what much of the conflict became after the electronic warfare race evened out. Both sides dug in. Both sides unleashed wave after wave of small unmanned aerial vehicles to harass and degrade enemy positions. For months, nobody gained significant ground. But then, Kursk happened. Russia was determined to retake the territory they had lost. Reinforcements arrived, including seasoned units from North Korea. It might sound like the plot of a bizarre historical fiction, but, well, there they were. Mostly inexperienced, suffering due to language barriers, but providing extra manpower for the Russian side nevertheless, learning also from earlier mistakes. Meanwhile, the United States, once a supporter of critical intelligence to Ukraine, pulled back its support, meaning the Ukrainians now had fewer real-time insights into Russian deployments. That gave the Russian force more breathing room to mass their own drone operators, to test out new tactics, and to plan a massive push. And suddenly, the Russians stopped being interested in inching along the front line, trench by trench. They hammered Ukrainian logistics instead. Attack the fuel trucks, attack the ammunition haulers, destroy anything that brings water, food or fresh medical supplies. If your enemy cannot resupply, their front line starts to narrow down and eventually collapse. What followed was that the Russians gathered every drone unit they could find, concentrated them in Kursk, and turned the area into one big trap. There is footage everywhere of how this played out. Drones lying in energy-saving mode near roads, waiting for unsuspecting vehicles to pass by. And as soon as something heavy enough to carry crucial supplies appears in the distance, the drones swoop in and, well, attack. What else to do? And if the direct attack was not enough, some drones functioned like mines. Fiber optic cables ensured these drones stayed connected, even in the presence of Ukrainian jammers. So it did not matter if the drone was on the ground for half an hour or the entire day. Once the operator spotted a target rolling past, the takeoff was pretty much green-lighted. Within days, the Ukrainian forces realized it became much more complicated than it used to be. They were not entirely encircled, despite claims from certain politicians or Z-propagandists who like to amplify the rumors, but they had no good reason to send men and vehicles to a region that became such a giant trap. So they withdrew, crossing the border back in Ukraine, reducing the controlled area to approximately 100 square miles, a reduction of 80%. And once again, guys, these are facts. You can take a look at any map of the conflict, including the pro-Ukrainian deep state. And yes, it is an uncomfortable truth, but the truth nevertheless. We have to report on real stories happening in this war between Russia and Ukraine. Because otherwise, we are risking turning into blinding propaganda, which will hurt us even more in the future. You might assume that once drones dominate the battlefield, every bit of warfare devolves into slow positional fighting with minimal movement. Because, why bother sending troops forward if they will be harassed by endless attacks from the sky? Yet what we are witnessing in Kursk suggests the opposite. Drones are enabling a new form of maneuver. Yes, they can cause stalemates, especially when used only for reconnaissance or sporadic attacks. But when the same technology is harnessed to isolate the battlefield, cut off supply lines, destroy lines of communication, and hamper reinforcements, then the entire front segments can collapse, unfortunately, in a matter of days. One Russian analyst, who goes by the nickname Russian Engineer, claims that this is the next logical step for drone warfare. He believes that once you can reliably sever your enemy's supply lines and prevent them from deploying rotating units, you open a path for a modern version of blitzkrieg that no longer depends on columns of tanks. On the Ukrainian side, some folk grudgingly agree, at least in part, but more importantly, they adapt. You hear stories of attempts to build netting tunnels over these roads, basically makeshift barriers to keep drones from attacking convoys. But these nets can only do so much. They might protect against overhead attacks, but a drone lying in a wait on the ground or creeping in from the angle from the side can still strike with high precision. And let's not forget that Ukraine itself had once used similar tactics pretty effectively. They are not novices in this theater of conflict. Russians, on the other hand, satisfied with the previous results of this tactic, are now building fiber optic drones by the thousands, and they are stockpiling them for whatever they plan to do next. If Ukraine wants to stop that new wave, they will have to figure out countermeasures that go beyond simple jamming or waiting for that moment to intercept them in midair. And one of the best options might be good old-fashioned sabotage, or physically hunting the drones and their cables on the foot. Simply follow the cable to the other end and you may just find yourself a hornet's nest. Well, that's it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Don't forget about this ambushing drones footage that I have right now on my Patreon. The link is down below. Thanks so much for your support. Thanks so much for watching the video. See you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.